I am married and I have 3 children. I am separated from my wife, who lives in England with my children. I was born in Wigan, Lancashire, England. I came to Ireland about 2 years ago. On August 5th, 1976, I went to live with another English chap called Chris Outram at Fethard, County Tipperary. Geoffrey came to stay at Outram's on Friday, August 27th, 1976. I got the loan of a car from Frank Walsh of Fethard. Walsh is a friend of Outram's. The car was in Austin. Geoffrey and I left Fethard in the car on the Saturday and we drove to Dublin. We went there to collect suitcases of Geoffrey's at the railway station along the quays. We collected them about 4 or 5 in the evening. We had a meal in the city. We decided to go to Britas Bay of Wicklow and break into some caravans. Somewhere outside Arklow, we went into a pub on the main road and had a few drinks. I don't know the name of the place. We left it after a few drinks. We then drove on towards Britas Bay. We were talking about girls, and Geoffrey said he was going to pick up a bird and have it off with her. I have been cautioned by Detective Guarder Tom Connolly that I am not obliged to say anything unless I wish to do so, but that anything I do say will be taken down in writing and may be used in evidence.
The 8th of August 1976, a young lady from Dublin by the name of Elizabeth Plunkett went to McDaniel's pub down in Britas Bay with a group of friends for a night out.
Elizabeth Plunkett, who was 23, a very attractive young woman, she was a foreign currency clerk in Dublin and from Ringsend herself. She was out with a group of girlfriends enjoying a night out in McDaniel's pub, which is near the caravan park in Britas Bay, and a popular pub for groups of Dubliners who were going out to the country.
McDaniel's was at that time a very popular pub for holidaymakers, and it was in full swing at that time of the year. During the course of the night in McDaniel's, a dispute arose between Elizabeth Plunkett and her boyfriend, and Elizabeth decided to leave. And that's the last that she was seen alive.
As Elizabeth left McDaniel's and began walking away, she was passed out by a number of people who would later help Gardaí piece together her last movements.
She was walking down towards Arklow. He passed her out. Jeff stopped and I got out. He turned the car and went back and picked up the girl. He then picked me up. I sat in the back and the girl in the front seat. She was wearing pants and a jumper with writing on it.
They picked Elizabeth Plunkett up on the pretext of giving her a lift. That night was a foul one in Wicklow. It had been raining very, very heavily. Elizabeth Plunkett got into the car, but she quickly became suspicious. But before she could escape, they fell upon her and beat her savagely. They took her in the car to Castletown Wood. There she underwent an unimaginable ordeal.
We drove to the woods with her. She told us she had a row with her boyfriend. She started to scream in the car, and we stuffed tissues into her mouth. When we got to the wood, we dragged her out of the car.
While Elizabeth was being taken into the woods, her boyfriend Damien Bush began to look for her. After driving around British Bay and Wicklow town, he drove back to Dublin to see if she had shown up at her sister's house. Unable to find her, he returned to British Bay and shortly later informed her father and the Gardaí about her disappearance. It was now Sunday, the 29th of August.
As a result of she not turning up at home, her disappearance was reported to Gardaí. And for the next week or so, there was a search organised around that area to see whether any trace of her or any of her belongings or anything could be found.
The following Monday, a chance meeting occurred which would turn out crucial in the search for the missing girl.
Monday morning, or Monday afternoon, a detective Garda from Wicklow was around British Bay, and he saw two men, unknown to him. They had a fire lighting on the side of the road somewhere, and he spoke to them. He took their names. One man gave the name Geoffrey Murphy, and the other man said that he was Geoffrey's brother. And they had an Austin Farina car, which the detective Garda took the number of, and the men told him that they were staying with a Chris Outram down in Feathered. The Garda done a great job. He took all these particulars down in his notebook. At the time, he did not know, or it was not generally known, that Elizabeth Plunkett was missing. So after some days, in a wood, not too far from McDaniel's, maybe half a mile or so, a shoe, lady's shoe, and a watch were found and identified by the family. Certainly the watch has been Elizabeth Plunkett's watch, and that the shoe they thought was hers as well. So there was search continued in that area, and there was two important discoveries made really in relation to the crime. It was a pair of black boots, size 6, with steel tips at the heels, and the tips were kept in place by brass screws, which was unusual. As well as that, there was a label found with the name Geoffrey Murphy was found in the immediate vicinity. After these articles being found in the wood, the Garda decided that it was very suspicious, and the chances are that Elizabeth Plunkett had been abducted. So there was an investigation group put together. At the time, I was stationed in Naas as a detective Garda, and I went, I was asked to go, or told to go, to Wicklow to assist in the investigations over there with a number of others, and joined up with the investigation section from Garda headquarters.
After news had circulated through the search party that Elizabeth Plunkett's belongings, the boots and the label with the name Murphy had been found, Detective Joseph Nealon informed his fellow officers about the two men he had spoken to by the fire.
We were there for 3 or 4 days when it was discovered that the Garda, Detective Garda, the late Garda, Detective Garda Joe Nealon, that these men were worthy of investigation.
The search for Elizabeth Plunkett continued, while the whereabouts of these two men remained unknown. were these suspicious characters? The Gardaí knew they had to work fast before any trace was lost.
We stayed on around the caravan park until sometime late that night or Tuesday morning. We then returned to Fethard. While we were there, we'd done a few strokes. We stayed there till September 10th, 76, and Chris drove us to Limerick. We came on to Salt Hill then, and we bought a caravan. We stayed in this caravan. We pinched a car in Clifton. Jeff pinched it, not me. A few days after that, we were in Castlebar one night. It was about 12 o'clock. Jeff was driving.
My name is Porrick Lyons. Been living in Castlebar all my life. We, after getting married in 1975, we lived in Lakeshore Drive for just over 20 years, and we moved to the Orchard in 1997. Castlebar in 1976 was a nice, progressive little town, but you know, since the boom time and the Celtic Tigers come along, it has really expanded out. Each road you go, there's hundreds of houses now compared to what it used to be at in 1976.
Castlebar in the mid-70s was a quiet, pretty quiet town. Like, there was a crime-free town, I would say, really. You know, a good town for employment and, you know, a pretty decent town. Like, people would leave their doors open at that time in certain estates. You know, there was no need. Crime wasn't an issue.
Porrick and Cyril were unaware that they would become key witnesses to the events that would unfold that Wednesday night, the 22nd of September.
I was at the cinema in Westport with my mother and my girlfriend, and when I arrived home to drive into my driveway, I noticed a car across the driveway. It was completely unusual because no one ever parked, for all the years I lived there, ever parked across my driveway. So on seeing the car there, I pulled in behind it and had a look into the car to see who it was, because I knew it wasn't any neighbour's car or anything like that. So I had a look at the two gents in the car, and I wrote down the number and the make of the car. And I went in home then, and I made a cup of tea, and then I brought my girlfriend home, but the car was gone. So probably half an hour after I had first seen it, when I came out to bring my girlfriend home, the car had gone.
At that time, there was a program on the television that most people were watching called Roots, about the slavery in America. So I decided to go into the local pub and watch it, have a couple of pints. So at about 11:15, it was over, so I headed for home. Went in the door and went up the stairs, and the next thing I heard this awful scream. So I shouted down to Mary, I said, "Did you hear that?" So Mary went to the front door and saw a car pulling off. But we thought no more of it until we heard about the abduction the next day. It was just like a female in trouble, you know, high-pitched kind of a scream. But it never dawned on us that anything like that had happened until we heard it the next day.
We saw a girl on the road walking along. Jeff stopped the car. I got out and went over to the girl.
In 1976, I was just finishing primary school and moving into secondary school, and I guess it was also one of the hottest summers ever, 76. It was one of those summers that it just broke all records in the summertime, and in the wintertime it was one of the coldest winters ever. So it was a kind of a weird year, you know, a very for any 11-year-old child, kind of just it's just one of those kind of landmark things that stand out in your life.
I grabbed a hold of her and dragged her to the car.
Mary Duffy was working as a waitress in the Wimpy bar close to the Telegraph offices here. It was a burger bar, and she worked there with several other girls. It was a very busy place because there were very few cafes as such in the town at that particular time. And it was a regular meeting place for quite a lot of people, and all the journalists here used to go there on a regular basis. And we knew Mary. She was a lovely girl, very helpful, very pleasant. And as I said, the shock of it just numbed everybody.
She started to scream. I pulled her into the back of the car and sat beside her. She told me her name was Mary.
Mary Duffy finished work in the Wimpy bar late on that particular night, around 11:30, maybe coming up to 12 o'clock. She telephoned her brother, or her home, to get her brother to come and collect her, as he normally would. As it so happened, he was gone somewhere else in the car, dropping somebody else home somewhere. And she was told that when he come back, he'd go and collect her. So in the meantime, she started to walk.
They must have been watching the kiosk across the road where she was making her phone call from. Mary Duffy made a phone call from a kiosk across the road, and that kiosk was visible from my driveway.
I think my first memory of Mary Duffy was, I think she worked in a shop on Castle Street, which was just below the boxing club, a place called Stewart's. And it was a little shop that I remember you walked down these kind of rounded steps, and you kind of walked down into the shop. And then when you got to the shop, you stepped down another level, and it was a tiny little shop, and Mary was there, and there was a 99 machine there. And so, you know, lots of kids spent time in there, you know.
Please, please!
She wasn't gone too far when two men, apparently Shaw and Evans, pulled up beside her in the car. One of them got out, dragged her back to the car, put her into the car. During the struggle, she screamed and she lost a set of dentures, which were subsequently found a day or two afterwards and identified by her dentist as being belonged to Mary Duffy.
Because at the time I used to work up in a place called the Royal Ballroom, which is still there, the Traveller's Friend, and I worked in the ladies' cloakroom hanging up their coats. So my job basically was hang up the coats and give them out at the end of the evening, you know. But Mary used to come quite often on a Sunday night. She'd come about 11:45. I remember when she came up to the hatch, she was like, a hatch was like one of these, the hatch was there, it's almost like everyone was in a portrait picture, you know, anybody who came kind of presented themselves, you only seen their tops of their heads and their shoulders really, you know, and I was a kid kind of looking up, so I used to grab the stuff and bring it down, you know. She always had time for me, and she wouldn't do it like in a way, oh, there's a little kid working in the cloakroom way, but in a way where as a human being. And I used to be able to joke with her and have fun with her, and you know, and she spent more time there than she probably was necessary, you know, because she was out her night out and she worked so hard. And but I always something about her that struck me, and I almost there was, you know, when someone's got a real sense of humanity in them, a real sense of goodness, it shows through.
When Mary's brother arrived to collect her, he couldn't find her. And as time went on, she couldn't be found. And her disappearance was reported to the Gardaí next morning. And a search organised for her went on for a number of days. She couldn't be found. Her disappearance and that of Elizabeth Plunkett were sort of very unusual incidents in Ireland at the time. And it was thought that perhaps the same people were involved. And the search was intensified for those two people that Joe Nealon had spoken to in British Bay.
The search and investigation continued in British Bay. A number of eyewitnesses came forward to help Gardaí piece together Elizabeth's last known movements. When a woman arrived at McDaniel's with her husband to pick up their son who had been working there that night, she saw Elizabeth leave the pub on her own. Shortly later, another motorist saw Elizabeth walking away from McDaniel's. He spotted a car that was driving in the opposite direction stop and pick up Elizabeth.
When we got to the wood, we dragged her out of the car. We climbed over a wire fence that was across the road there. We went into the woods with her. We had a hold of her. We put her to lie down, and she did so.
Suspicions arose about the two men Detective Nealon had encountered the day after Elizabeth's disappearance. These two men now became the focus of the investigation. Based on the information Detective Nealon had obtained, Gardaí travelled to Fethard to question Chris Outram as to the whereabouts of Geoffrey Murphy and his supposed brother. With them, they had the boots that had been found in the woods, the boots with the unusual brass screws.
So a few of us went down to Tipperary, down to Clonmel, where we went to see Chris Outram. Detective Superintendent, Detective Inspector at the time, John Courtney, was in the group. And we interviewed Outram. The shoes or the boots were produced to him. And when he saw them, he says, "Oh, they're Geoffrey Evans's boots." He says, I recognise them, he says, because I repaired them for him in the prison in Dublin. So he then told the Gardaí that on Saturday, the 28th, the day that Elizabeth Plunkett was abducted from outside McDaniel's, that Geoffrey Evans' pal, a fellow by the name of John Shaw, borrowed a car from his friend, Outram's friend, and they went to Dublin. And they were away for a couple of days. And he says they came back here on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and they decided to leave. And he says he drove them to Limerick on the 10th of September, and he didn't know where they were after that.
From this one piece of evidence, Gardaí now had the true identity of the two men they had been looking for, Englishmen John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans. Evidence now speculatively put them in and around the location where Elizabeth was last seen.
Investigation into Elizabeth Plunkett's disappearance continued for a number of weeks. In and around Fethard, in case they'd return, and in and around British Bay. Their description was circulated throughout the force, and it appeared in the media.
In the weeks after Elizabeth's disappearance, Shaw and Evans tried to lay low in the west of Ireland. On the 14th of September, the two men approached the Barna Caravan Park caretaker in order to buy a caravan. They purchased one for £380 and for the receipt gave the names Roy Hall and David Ball. 1 week later, they moved the caravan to a quieter part of the park. The following day, Evans stole a 1970 Fern Green Ford Cortina in Clifton. In order to evade Gardaí, they hand-painted it black and changed the number plates.
It was a black box-shaped Cortina with a Dublin registration, and to me it seemed to have been hand-painted. Like, it didn't look like a finished product of paint, you know what I mean, like a garage spray car. It seemed to have been hand painted, that's all I can say, you know.
With a nationwide investigation underway, numerous sightings of the peculiar Englishmen were reported to Gardaí, but Shaw and Evans had still managed to evade capture. Unaware that the Gardaí were closing in on them, the two men travelled to Castlebar late at night on the 22nd of September. It was on this night that Mary Duffy began the 20-minute walk home to Belcarra after work, expecting to be collected by her brother along the way. She never arrived home.
Mary Duffy was reported missing in around the 20th of September in 1976. Her disappearance was suspicious, and there was an alert sent out to keep an eye out for her.
I just heard about the abduction of Mary Duffy when I went into work the next morning. So when I inquired about what time was it at, and they said about 11:25. So then I decided I'd go to the barracks to see could I be of any assistance to them, just to tell them what I had heard. So the guards took my statement, and about an hour later they came to my place of work to go over it and see could I add anything further to it. And I just told them I was sorry I couldn't. I just heard the scream and my wife saw the car pulling off.
A team of 60 Gardaí are now engaged in the search. Many of them have been drafted into Castlebar from outlying districts. They've been calling on householders in the town, asking if they saw the girl or can give any information that might help to locate her. And they've appealed to townspeople to come forward if they think they can help. Miss Duffy was last seen leaving the coffee shop in Castlebar's Ellison Street last Wednesday night at 11 o'clock. From there, she walked to a phone booth at the junction of McHale Road and Ball Road. After leaving the phone booth, she probably walked along the Brafey Road towards her home 5 miles away, but she never arrived.
And then just as Detective Bohan was leaving, I remembered, I better tell him about the car. That was unusual to be parked outside my house, and the two gents that was in it. So that was it. He came in and then took statements. And
she was only just reported, but as time went on, the authorities connected the two. There was Elizabeth Plunkett's disappearance and Mary Duffy's disappearance or something similar.
About 2 days after Mary Duffy disappeared, a publican in Manbridge, in Connemara, he also had petrol pumps. 2 men, Englishmen, as he said, drove in and got petrol. He thought him, he had read the papers. He had read about the description of the 2 Englishmen that were missing, or that were wanted, the 2 Englishmen that were wanted in relation to the disappearance of 2 girls. And took the number of their car, and he noted it was a Ford car, and it was hand-painted black. And he noted the number down in some document in the pub, and the following day he reported it to the guards. Now, it was a big search, and this sighting of this car and the number was circulated again throughout the force. The following Sunday night, which was the 26th of September, which was the night of the All-Ireland football final. The Dublin defeated Kerry. I remember it well. That night, at 11:30, Jim Boland, Garda Jim Boland, and Garda Corcoran of Salt Hill, they saw the car parked in the promenade near a hotel. So they kept it under observation, and they contacted the Gardaí in Galway for assistance.
PJ Corcoran and myself, we were working in Salt Hill that night. Early that night, PJ and I, we were in the patrol car, and we said that we'd have to keep an eye out for those two English guys, that it'd be terrible if they were living in our area and we didn't know it. That night, I was driving the patrol car. PJ Corcoran was the observer. We were driving from Barna into Salt Hill. There was a disco on in the Ocean Wave hotel in Salt Hill. That was the first disco that was in Galway. There was a lot of cars parked outside it. We decided that we'd check the cars on both sides of the road. PJ was checking on the left-hand side, and I was checking on the right-hand side. As we went down the street, I noticed this car that we were looking for. We went down the street a little bit. We decided that PJ go to the station to ring Galway for help. We didn't want to talk over the radio to the station because a lot of youngsters around the place had walkie-talkies and they were listening to our messages. PJ decided to go down to the station, and I drove up a laneway up towards Seamount. I parked the car up there, and I could see the car down on the promenade. PJ was only gone a short time when two men came from the direction of the hotel where the disco was on, and I went into the car. So therefore, there was only, just had to make up our mind there and then. I decided to tell the Galway car over the radio, come to Salt Hill as quick as you can. The two men got into the car and I was driving down. They couldn't pull out until I passed. I left the headlights on, full headlights. They were waiting for me to pass. I was in touch with the Galway car and I was asking them where they were. In the end, they said, "We're behind you now." I said, "When I get out of the car," I said to the Galway lads, "When I get out of the car, I'll catch the driver and let you catch the passenger." I got out of the car, caught the driver. PJ and the Galway lads caught the passenger. They were caught just like that.
They were brought to Eglinton Street Garda Station and they were detained for possession of a stolen car.
Shaw and Evans, who had told Garda Boland their names were Hall and Ball, were moved from Salt Hill Station to Eglinton Street 1 hour after they were arrested. They were detained in their cells until early the next morning, when a series of interviews were conducted. The Gardaí interrogated the suspects until they revealed their true identities and criminal past.
Geoffrey Evans and John Shaw were both in their 30s when they arrived in Ireland in 1974. They were already on the run. They were wanted for questioning in the UK in connection with 3 savage sexual assaults which had happened to women in and around the Manchester area where they were from. John Shaw was a former miner. He was powerfully built, dark, brooding individual. He already had 26 previous convictions, including 2 for sexual assault. Geoffrey Evans was the more intelligent of the 2. He also had a string of convictions as long as your arm. He had spent a considerable amount of time in prison already. He was the more cunning and he was the dominant figure in their evil partnership.
Shaw and Evans came to Ireland on the run from the English police. In order to support themselves here, their criminal tendencies began once again.
They needed 2 things. They needed money and they needed transport. To that end, they travelled down to Wicklow and carried out a number of burglaries, mostly on households. But the burglaries were bungled and they were quickly caught by the Gardaí, brought to the courts, convicted and sent to prison. Now, at this stage, the British authorities heard about their arrest and the fact that they were in prison, and they began to initiate extradition proceedings against them. Now, at that time, the height of the Troubles, extradition proceedings in Ireland were notoriously fraught. Mostly they were initiated to bring back suspected INLA and IRA terrorists for terrorist offences which had occurred in British territories. But the British police had pretty substantial evidence against Shaw and Evans in relation to the sexual assaults which had happened in and around Manchester, including fingerprint evidence. One would have thought that that should have been it. But when the case was heard in the Bridewell, it quickly became clear that the courts were demanding cast iron evidence before they were going to allow Shaw and Evans to be extradited back to the UK. And the extradition process failed. Shaw and Evans were released on bail pending production of further evidence by the UK authorities. Suddenly, they were free. They quickly left Dublin and headed down to Fettered in County Tipperary, where they had a friend. They left Fettered and they travelled towards Dublin. As they approached Dublin, they veered south. They headed towards Wicklow, their old haunting ground from the robberies for which they'd been convicted. And they found their way to British Bay.
But the true extent of Shaw and Evans' evil was still unknown. It was not until they were interviewed by Detective Tom Connolly that the cold and ugly truth would begin to come to light. Gardaí believed, as it had been over a month since Elizabeth's disappearance, that there was probably little hope that she would be found unharmed. However, as Mary had only been missing for a comparatively short amount of time, hope for her well-being remained. The interviews with Shaw and Evans were now the detectives' last chance to find the girls.
At about 1:30 in the morning, Monday morning, I got a telephone call at home from, as he was at the time, Detective Inspector John Courtney, telling me about the arrest and to be in Galway as soon as I could the following morning. So I left home Went to Kildare, picked up, took the Garda Team Kennedy. Both of us went to Eglinton Street Station in Galway. We arrived about 7:30 in the morning. We were first to arrive. Things were very quiet at the station. The two, Shaw and Evans, were in their cells. So I inquired to know if anybody had searched their place where they were staying. It was known at the time that they had a caravan which they were staying in at Barna, just outside Salt Hill. I asked, had anybody searched it? And the people who were there said, no, it's been preserved. Nobody has searched it. So I decided that possibly Mary Duffy could be in the caravan. Shaw and Geoffrey Evans, two Englishmen, came to Ireland mainly because they were wanted by the police in England for rape of a young girl, the daughter, I understand, of a policeman in England. On arrival in Ireland, they start committing crime. They had several convictions in England before going to Ireland. So they broke into a number of houses, caravans, and committed several thefts, mainly around the southeast and down the south of Ireland. They were eventually caught and charged and convicted in the district court, and they were sentenced to a term of imprisonment. They were eventually released from prison, Mountjoy in Dublin, having spent 12 months or more in prison.
After Shaw and Evans were released, they travelled to Feathered. There they stayed with Chris Outram, a man they had met in prison. From here, Shaw and Evans would begin a journey through Ireland, which would leave its people scarred for many years. In the months following their release, 2 girls went missing. Shaw and Evans became the main suspects, and a nationwide manhunt was launched.
On the Monday morning, I saw Geoffrey Evans in one of the cells in the station. I took from him all the items of clothing that he was wearing and footwear. And he was given other clothing and footwear. And the clothing I took from him was handed over to another member for forensic examination. Shortly after that, Detective Inspector John Courtney, as he was at that time, and I brought Geoffrey Evans to an office in the Garda station, where we started to question him in relation to the disappearance of Elizabeth Plunkett and Mary Duffy. We asked him to tell us where himself and John Shaw went on the occasion that they got the loan of the car in Feathered on the 27th of August. Told us that Shaw and himself drove to Dublin for the purpose of collecting 2 suitcases of his that were in a railway station beside the quays.
Geoffrey and I left Feathered in the car on the Saturday and we drove to Dublin. We went there to collect suitcases of Geoffrey's at the railway station along the quays. We collected them about 4 or 5 in the evening. We had a meal in the city. We decided to go to British Bay of Wicklow and break into some caravans.
So he says they drove to Dunleary on that Saturday night after leaving Dublin. Slept in the car in the main street in Dunleary. Went on to British Bay Sunday morning and arrived there at about 11 a.m. And he said that they stayed around for a while. Then they went to Wicklow, had a drink and a meal, and later on went to Arklow and had more drink and another meal. And went back around British Bay and McDaniel's on the Sunday night. So we told him that we understood that a car similar to the one that they had was seen around British Bay and McDaniel's on the night of Saturday, the 28th, the night Elizabeth Plunkett disappeared. So we asked him, did he miss anything when he was leaving Outram's? Was he searching for anything before he left? And he says, yes, I was. I was looking for a pair of boots of mine. I couldn't find them. So he was asked to describe them. And he said, size 6, black, with steel tips on the heels, and there was brass screws keeping the tips on. Then we said, well, we have your boots. And you didn't leave them at Outram's, but you left them in British Bay, in a wood. So, change the story then. He said they did not drive to Dunleary on the Saturday night. They drove down to British Bay, left their car at a pub on the main road and walked down to McDaniel's. Himself and John Shaw. And when our interview finished, at 7 o'clock, we had Shaw and Evans around McDaniel's at 10:30 on the Saturday night.
On the Saturday night in question, Elizabeth Plunkett was out with friends at McDaniel's pub in British Bay. At 11 p.m, Elizabeth left the pub alone after an argument with her boyfriend. She was unaware her path would cross with that of Shaw and Evans. As Tom Connolly interviewed Geoffrey Evans, the shocking truth of what happened that night slowly revealed itself.
John Shaw asked to be allowed to go to the toilet, and he was brought there by some member who was on duty. So he went into the toilet and locked the door. And after a while, it was discovered that he was missing. He had got out the toilet window into the backyard. But he got out onto the street and had travelled some distance when some member from the station happened to be on the street and recognised him. And he was rearrested and brought back to the station. So he was intent on getting away if he could. Coming up to 12 o'clock on that Monday night, I was in the station with a number of other Gardaí, and we became aware that Geoffrey Evans was admitting to involvement in the disappearance of Elizabeth Plunkett and Mary Duffy. Now, at this time, John Shaw was in his cell. So at 4 a.m, Detective Garda Jerry Carroll, as he was then, and I, went to his cell and brought him to an office upstairs in the Garda station. We told him that we did not believe the story that he had been telling the police up to this. We told him that his colleague, Geoffrey Evans, had admitted his involvement in the disappearance of the two girls and that he had made a statement involving John Shaw. And we asked him to tell us the truth. And we told him that it was important to the families that the bodies of the two girls were recovered, that we knew that they had been killed. And we kept talking to him as best we could and sort of coaxing him and encouraging him and cajoling him. And eventually he says, all right, I'll tell you everything. He says, I didn't want to do it. It was Geoffrey made me do it, or asked me to do it. He said to me, remember what happened in England, John? And he says, we have to kill them. So then asked him, would he make a statement, a written statement? And he says, I will, but he says, well, you write it down. So I said, I will write it down, yes. So he made a statement, long statement. Can I just turn aside here and get this? He agreed to make a statement. So I started to write it down. And I just happened to have a copy of the original here. It was 6 handwritten pages of foolscap, where he outlined in detail the abduction and the murder of Elizabeth Plunkett at British Bay, and the abduction and the murder of Mary Duffy in Castlebar. Outlined what he'd done and what they'd done and where they had disposed of the bodies of the two girls.
We drove to the woods with her. She told us she had a row with her boyfriend. She started to scream in the car, and we stuffed tissues into her mouth. When we got to the wood, we dragged her out of the car, climbed over a wire fence that was across the road there. We went into the woods with her. We had a hold of her. We put her to lie down, and she did so. We took the suitcases out of the car and put them on the ground beside her. Jeff told me to take the car away. I went away in the car and left Jeff with the girl. I parked the car in a car park on the main Dublin road at a pub. I walked back to where Jeff and the girl were. I was gone about 5 hours and it was getting light when I got back. I saw people walking along the road trying to stop cars, and I got in over a gate. When I got back to Jeff and the girl, I saw that the girl's hands were tied. Her clothes were on. I took off her pants and had intercourse with her. She was struggling all the time. Jeff went a short distance away while I was having intercourse with her. He then returned and he had intercourse with her. Jeff said he would go and get the car, and then he told me to kill her while he was away. He said to me, remember what happened in England. Jeff went off for the car and I had intercourse with the girl again. When Jeff came back, he said, why haven't you killed her? He said again, remember what happened in England. I took a nylon shirt out of one of the cases, put the sleeve around her neck and choked her. She was then dead. It was then about 6 in the evening of Sunday. We left her in the forest and we went to the caravan site and broke into a few caravans. Sometime after midnight, we returned to the forest with the car. We carried the dead girl to the car and we put her into the back seat. I think Jeff had her pants and watch. We drove down to the caravan site again. We got a lawnmower out of a shed by one of the caravans and a rope. We put her into a boat. We tied her onto the lawnmower with the rope. Jeff and I rowed out into the sea. Jeff threw her out, and she sank.
He said that they rowed out to sea and dumped the body into the sea. Came back, put back the boat in a different place, and burnt her clothes, and they were met by the Garda. And they gave their names to the Garda and told him they were burning rubbish. Having told us about killing Elizabeth Plunkett and how they disposed of the body and burnt her clothes, John Shaw then told us about another girl that they had murdered. He told us that 3 or 4 days ago, we were coming through Castlebar one night late, around 12 o'clock. And they saw a girl on the road walking.
We saw a girl on the road walking along. Jeff stopped the car. I got out and went over to the girl. She started to scream. I grabbed a hold of her and dragged her to the car. I put her into the back of the car and sat beside her. She told me her name was Mary. We headed for Clifton. While Jeff drove the car along the road, I had intercourse with the girl. She didn't scream, but she said, "Don't do me any harm." We got to a forest and stopped.
It was at the early hours of the morning at this time, and both of them raped the girl in the wood. A number of times.
When she was alive, Jeff drove off in the car. Jeff was away about 4 hours. He went to the caravan, got some food and the pills. While Jeff was away, I had intercourse twice with the girl. When Jeff returned, he had a cavity concrete block in the car. There was also a rope. We gave her some sandwiches and some barley water. Jeff gave her some pills to take. She took them and got a bit dozy. Jeff told her they were sleeping pills, and he would take her home. I got a cushion out of the car and put it over her head. And put my hands around her neck and killed her. We threw her into the back of the car with her clothes. Jeff said he'd found a spot to dump her. I tied the concrete block onto her with the rope. Jeff tied an anchor and a brick to her. We broke into a shed beside the lake. We took 2 hours out of it. There were a number of boats on the lake. We put the girl into the boat and went out onto the lake. It was dark. We dumped her into the lake, and I think she sank. We left the boat back in the same place, and we put the oars in the shed. The girl had big leather boots and wore 2 rings. We took off the rings and threw them in the forest someplace. We returned to Salt Hill and went to our caravan. I have heard this statement read over to me, and it is correct.
Mary Duffy would have been with them alive for about, I'd say, 22 or 3 hours. The same would apply with Elizabeth Plunkett. She would have been with them for in or around the same period of time when they killed her. So you could just imagine what those 2 girls went through in the last hours of their lives with those 2 people. At the end of the written statement that Shaw made to Jerry Carroll and I in Galway, before the conclusion of it, he said, and it's incorporated into the statement, he says, "I will help you in every way I can to recover the two bodies of the two girls I killed, and I will do anything I can to help." In the early afternoon, around 1:30, 2 o'clock, I spoke to John Shaw, and I reminded him that he had said that he would go and point us out different places. So he agreed.
Later that day, John Shaw was driven to Lough Ina, accompanied by Tom Connolly and a number of other members of the investigating team.
So we drove to within 3 miles of it with John Shaw. And he was told, "Well, you direct us from here." So he directed us to the lake, and he pointed out the club or the boathouse, and he says, "This is where we are." We broke in there and we got 2 oars and an anchor. And he pointed out a buoy that was floating in the lake, and he says, "I remember that." He says, "We bumped into it in the dark." And he indicated a place in the lake, somewhere out around the centre of the lake, that he thought is the spot where they dumped the body. But he says, "I'm not sure, it was dark." Then he brought us to a spot where there was a wire fence running at right angles to the road out towards the lake. And down along that fence, about 300 yards down in the grass, he says, "I threw her rings around here someplace." She had 2 rings. Now, a subsequent search in that area, 2 rings were found, and they were identified as the property of Mary Duffy. He brought us to a bridge over a river flowing into the sea somewhere near Clifton. And he says we threw our sleeping bags in there. And a number of other places, roads near the lake, he pointed out to us where they had burnt clothing and other bits and pieces belonging to Mary Duffy. So we went there, and there was clothing there, some of it partly burnt, and he said that they were Mary Duffy's.
Shaw then directed the detectives to a wood in Ballynahinch, where he and Evans had brutally raped and murdered Mary Duffy.
When we got there, we could see that there was a cushion cover, and there was a bit of plastic. Whether it was a ground sheet or whatever they were using it for, I don't know. But on that plastic ground sheet, which was taken possession of at the time and handed over to the fingerprint section, there was a palm print on it. And when Mary Duffy's body was discovered, it was found that one of Mary Duffy's hands had made that palm print on that. So it was connected, that scene was connected with Mary Duffy. And the following day, I saw John Shaw in Wicklow. And again, I spoke to him and reminded him that he had said that he would help us in relation to different places around Wicklow and where the body was disposed of and where they had put or burnt some of Elizabeth Plunkett's clothing. So, Detective Inspector, as he was then, Hugh Reynolds, was with us. So we went off in Inspector Reynolds' car, directed by John Shaw, and he brought us to the wood up behind McDonald's. And he says, in there somewhere. And then he said, the place has all changed. because a big search had taken place there. A lot of the undergrowth was uprooted and things like that. So then he brought us down to McDaniel's and right across the road down to the sea. Pointed out to the sea and says, way out there somewhere. He showed us the caravan park or caravan where he had taken the lawnmower. And then he brought us up to where they had burned Elizabeth Plunkett's clothing.
That evening, a body was found, face down, on the foreshore at Duncormac Hill in Wexford. 2 days later, just over 4 weeks since she had disappeared, the body would be officially identified as being that of Elizabeth Plunkett. The search for Mary had now entered its second week.
Well, after the arrest, there was a sense of relief in the town that the two men had been caught. But now the thing was to find the body was the next thing that everyone was hoping would happen, you know.
The search of Lough Ina was proving difficult, and so on the 3rd of October, Gardaí brought in a number of experienced divers based in County Galway.
College was approached to see if they could render some assistance with the search that had been already started. And the college authorities allowed those of us who were qualified to devote any time that was feasible to the search. Point of fact, that turned out to be a full-time effort for a period of practically 2 weeks, I think.
We came back from a job in Rosslare, I think it was, with the department, and we had a request from the Gardaí to go and help them the following day. I had no idea of what it was. I was just told, myself and another guy were told to go out to Connemara to give them help with the search. I didn't really know who it was until we got out there.
The search pattern as it was made up by the supervising Gardaí was a sweep search using a long metal bar, and each team consisted of about 8 or 9 diving personnel stretched along the bar within visual contact of each other, and this bar was then pushed ahead of the diver to cover the ground and then turned around at the other side of the lake and back. Beneath the surface, it was cold, it was dark, and most of the searching was done actually by feel, because the visibility was very, very low, and the passage of the search teams kicked up so much sediment that the next sweep just ran into the same sediment. So, as I said, the searching was principally by feel.
I remember it being extremely cold. Obviously it was fresh water, so fresh water tends to get cold very quick, but it was cold. Conditions under the water were extremely poor, very, very poor visibility. It really was a case, it was even difficult to tell the difference between the bottom and the water body. It was like swimming through mud.
Early days, I can recall being on the search bar and saying, well, I hope she is found, but I really hope it's not me that finds her, because of the obvious emotional impacts of it. By the end of the search period, everyone, I think, was of the same mind that, please, let her be found. Let her be found now. Let it be me that finds her, if necessary. Just let her be found now, because it was pushing the limits of our capacity to turn in day after day to try and search this boggy, wet hole, looking for this poor girl's body.
On the 10th of October, after a long and gruelling 2-week search of Lough Ina, Mary Duffy's body was found.
The protocol that we had arranged for the search teams was that the person who found anything, the body hopefully, would signal by tapping on the bar. The others, except the person to his immediate left, would surface, and the person to his left would remain to mark the site. Unfortunately, I happened to be the person to the immediate left of Tommy Ulveen, the man who found the body eventually on a Sunday, I think it was. And so the other members of the team and Tommy surfaced and reported the find, and I sat there in the mud at the bottom of this lake alone with the body for a period of about 5-10 minutes. That was uncomfortable, but at the same time, as I previously alluded to, I was very, very happy that the search was over. It certainly was the most impactful search emotionally that I've ever done, and I have been involved in several other searches since, but nothing has impacted me like the search for Mary Duffy.
The nation was stunned by the cruel and brutal nature of the two murders, and it would be over a year before justice was seen. Even though Shaw and Evans had confessed and Gardaí had a great deal of evidence, a long and difficult court case lay ahead. In July 1977, John Shaw went on trial for the murder, rape and false imprisonment of Mary Duffy. It would take the DPP 7 months and 2 trials to win the case. John Shaw's defence centred on 2 key issues. The first being that no warrant had been issued, allowing Gardaí to enter the caravan, and therefore any evidence acquired there should be inadmissible. The second being that at the time he confessed, he was in unlawful custody, and so anything he said could not be used as evidence.
The law at the time was that you had no power to detain a person for the purpose of questioning in relation to a crime, with one exception. And that was if a person was arrested under the Offences Against the State Act 1939. So the guards had no power to detain somebody for the purpose of questioning in relation to a crime. They had power to arrest, and then immediately or as soon as possible they should be brought before a peace commissioner at that time or a district justice.
During John Shaw's first trial, the judge agreed with the defence's argument that his statement was inadmissible.
Judge McWilliam refused to allow the statement to be admitted. So the jury had no idea whatsoever was in the statement. There was a lot of tension while the jury were out, wondering what was going to happen. I certainly was very worried. If the jury finds him not guilty, it will be a terrible thing to happen, that after admitting to 2 horrific murders, that the Gardaí had no power to detain somebody to ask them questions about a crime. As it so happened, the jury didn't find him guilty. The jury disagreed. And as far as the Garda was concerned, I thought it was a good decision for us, because we had another bite of the cherry, so to speak. There'd be another trial.
Fortunately, the judge in Shaw's second trial decided to inquire as to why the Gardaí had not brought the two men to court the Monday after they had been arrested.
Up to the time they admitted, we were not sure that they were dead, that there was a possibility that certainly Mary Duffy, who was only abducted maybe 4 days or 5 before the arrest, there was a possibility that she was alive somewhere and that they had her detained. So the judge took his time, and rightly so, because it was a very important case. When he eventually did give his judgment, he allowed a statement. He allowed a statement. And the reasons he gave was that yes, when they were not brought before the district court in Galway at 10:30 on the Monday, after that they were in unlawful custody. And he said it was a deliberate and conscious decision by the guards not to bring him to the court. But he said, John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans' constitutional rights were infringed. But he said also Mary Duffy's and Elizabeth Plunkett's constitutional rights were infringed. Their right to life guaranteed under the Constitution. And he says their rights superseded the rights of John Shaw. And he said he would allow the statement.
In February 1978, John Shaw was sentenced to life for the murder, rape and false imprisonment of Mary Duffy. As John Shaw's trial and sentencing had set a precedent, Evans' trial lasted only 1 month, and he was sentenced to life for the false imprisonment and rape of Mary Duffy and false imprisonment and rape of Elizabeth Plunkett. John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans were sent to Arbor Hill Prison to serve out their sentence. In 2003, Shaw was moved to Castlereagh Prison at his own request. In 2008, Evans fell into a coma after undergoing heart bypass surgery. Evans died on the 21st of May 2012. Shaw still remains in prison.
During the course of the statement that I took from John Shaw with Jerry Carroll, I was horrified to hear the ordeal that the two young girls had been subjected to when these two men abducted them and murdered them and beat them and spoke about having to kill them in their presence. I was horrified. And to this day, I'm still horrified when I think of what I had to go through. And I'm sure many other members of the force who were involved in that case feel the same way. It's the worst case that I have heard of, or certainly that I have been involved in during my time in the Garda. Absolutely shocking. John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans were the most evil. Or is evil the right word? Well, is evil the right word? Heartless and evil.